Hello everyone, Dr. Polaris here. On the 22nd of December 1938, trawler captain Hendrik Goosen returned to the harbour at East London, South Africa, now known officially as Kugompo City. Alongside the expected haul of hake, mackerel and anchovies, however, was a bizarre fish species, the likes of which the captain had never seen before. Upon returning to port, he contacted his friend Marjorie Courtney Latimer, who was the curator of the East London Museum. Knowing that she would probably want to examine the strange animal, Marjorie was fascinated with the specimen upon first laying eyes on it. The fish was roughly the size of a small adult human, with prominent bulging eyes, bluish-grey scales, and 8 fleshy lobe-like fins, which almost resembled the limbs of land-based tetrapods. After not being able to find any descriptions of the animal in her books, Marjorie attempted to contact her associate, Professor J.L.B. Smith, but he was away celebrating Christmas with family. In the meantime, she had the fish sent to a taxidermist, with this specimen still being on display in the East London Museum today. When Smith returned, he immediately identified the animal as a coelacanth, a type of lobe-finned fish of the class Actinistia, which up to that point were only known from fossil remains. Indeed, it was thought that this lineage had died out during the KPG extinction event. Yet here was a very modern, stuffed example in front of his very eyes. Smith officially named the animal Latimeria cholumni, viewing it as being a living fossil that had outdone the Loch Ness Monster in actually being a real, bona fide prehistoric survivor. Smith desperately wanted to examine more individuals, although he'd have to wait until 1952, when Ahmadi Abdullah, a fisherman from the Comoro Islands, produced a second specimen. While the fish was novel to Western scientists, the local people of the Comoro Islands were familiar with the species, which they referred to as the gombesa. In fact, the locals were quite confused as to what all the fuss was about, given that coelacanths were thought unimportant to them due to their foul, poor-tasting flesh. Since 1952, it's been established that Latimeria cholumni is native to deep water habitats elsewhere along the east coast of Africa, including in Madagascar, Mozambique and Kenya. A second species, Latimeria manadoensis, was scientifically described in 1999, with this animal being endemic to the deep waters of eastern Indonesia and Papua. These are quite similar to their African counterparts, but are brownish-grey in colour, having diverged from them between 30 to 40 million years ago. While often thought of as being living fossils, the modern genus Latimeria is quite different from its Cretaceous relatives, having developed into specialised deep-water ambush predators with slow metabolisms, with individuals potentially living for up to 100 years. As mentioned earlier, these animals are roughly human-sized, reaching a maximum of almost 2 metres in length and 100 kilograms or over 200 pounds in mass, although most adults are smaller than this. Given their habitat preferences, it's not surprising that Latimeria possesses a long ghost lineage, with its closest extinct relative being the genus Swenzia from the late Jurassic of Europe over 150 million years ago. Thus, the living coelacanths are perhaps the most well-known example of the Lazarus Phenomenon, wherein animals previously only known from fossils are identified as being alive and well in the modern world after a notable period of absence from the fossil record. While Latimeria possesses a ghost lineage of about 150 million years, with the broader clade coelacanthiforms thought to have vanished around 66 million years ago, most Lazarus taxa are substantially younger than this, with most assumed to have become extinct during the Pleistocene or Holocene. The most recent and timely example of this are 2 species of Australian possums, the ring-tailed glider and the pygmy long-fingered possum, which were previously known from early Holocene-aged fossils, but were discovered alive in the forests of western Papua in 2026. These were found in a joint collaboration between scientists, indigenous communities and citizen scientists, highlighting the importance of such efforts. Both species were thought to have died out roughly 7,000 years ago. Other Australian Lazarus taxa include the adorable mountain pygmy possum Burramys parvus, a tiny mouse-sized marsupial that was first described on the basis of Pleistocene-aged fossil remains found in the Wombayan caves in central New South Wales. The species was assumed to be extinct until a live individual was found in 1966 at a ski resort in Victoria. Today, the possum is classified as being critically endangered, and is represented by 3 small isolated populations in the alpine mountains of southeastern Australia. Requiring scree slopes and boulder formations, these tiny possums are the only exclusively alpine Australian marsupials, feeding mostly on bogong moths, but supplementing their diet with berries and seeds. Similarly, the Lord Howe Island stick insect, often referred to as land lobsters or walking sausages, were feared extinct when their small island ecosystem was devastated by the arrival of black rats during the early 20th century. However, in 2001, researchers discovered a population of less than 30 individuals on the small islet of Ball's Pyramid, which lies 14 miles off the coast of Lord Howe Island. A breeding program has since been established in order to boost their desperately low numbers. Meanwhile, across the water in New Zealand, the unusual Takahé, a heavy-billed flightless bird and largest member of the rail family, was feared to have gone extinct at some time after 1898, when the last live specimen was captured. No Takahé sightings were reported for the next 50 years, until the species was thankfully rediscovered in a remote valley located in the South Island's Murchison Mountains. With already low Holocene population numbers, this animal was drastically impacted by the arrival of Europeans in New Zealand, being hunted by humans and introduced stoats, while they also faced competition from populations of invasive red deer. Today there are around 500 or so individuals, with these numbers slowly rising by about 8 birds per year. Turning now to South America, we come to the Chacoan peccary Catagonus wagneri, which was first described in 1930 on the basis of fossil material, with it being thought that these belonged to an extinct species. However, living representatives of the animal were found dwelling in hot, arid thorn scrub ecosystems in the Salta province of Argentina in 1975. Chacoan peccaries are also native to Paraguay and Bolivia, where they feed on tough, spiny vegetation with a particular preference for cacti. The species is listed as being endangered, with there being only 3,000 individuals left in the wild, with their habitat being threatened by the expansion of large cattle ranches. In a similar position is the unusual bush dog, a stocky, vaguely mustarded-like pseudocyonin canid that was first identified from fossils recovered from central Brazil in 1842 and classified in the genus Speothos. The man who recorded this discovery, Peter Wilhelm Lund, would encounter living representatives of the animal just a year later, although he didn't realise that they were one and the same with the fossil material, with Lund naming the modern bush dog Icthysion. This mistake was not corrected until well into the 20th century. These small pack-hunting canids possess an extensive range in the wild, comprising much of northern South America. Unlike the vast majority of the animals covered in this video, although their population numbers are still declining due to deforestation and habitat degradation, being listed as near threatened. All of the Lazarus taxa discussed so far have fossil records stretching back only within the last 2 million years or so, although there are many species that have been rediscovered after significantly longer gaps in the fossil record, going back to the Miocene. Staying with South America, a good example would be the Monito del Monte, a small arboreal marsupial native to the temperate Valdivian forests of the southern Andes. Despite dwelling in South America, the animal is a member of Australodelphia, the clade which contains all of the Australian marsupials. It's also the only living representative of the clade Microbiotheria, which were once commonplace across South America, Antarctica, and possibly even Australia during the early Cenozoic, but vanished from the fossil record during the late Miocene. The closest relative of the Monito del Monte is probably Microbiotherium from the early Miocene, meaning that the living animal has a relatively long ghost lineage of at least 20 million years, and probably more. Being a small specialised mammal, endemic to a very specific cool temperate forested ecosystem, it's no wonder that the Monito has left no trace in the fossil record. In a similar position is the Laotian rock rat, Laonastes enigmamus. Native to the remote limestone karsts of central Laos and Vietnam, these dark-furred rodents somewhat resemble large rats, although possess narrow-pointed snouts and bushy squirrel-like tails. Again, the animal was already well known to local people before it was scientifically described by Western zoologists. The Laotian rock rat is classified as being a member of the family Diatomyidae, a group of rodents that were once common across South and East Asia during the Oligocene and Miocene, but were initially thought to have gone extinct roughly 11 million years ago. This led Mary Dawson, the co-author of the paper describing the animal in 2005, to refer to it as being the coelacanth of rodents. Like the Monito del Monte, this small forest-dwelling mammal lives in a restricted ecosystem with poor rates of fossil preservation, so it's not surprising that the genus does not show up in the fossil record. In addition, the Lazarus phenomenon is not only limited to members of the animal kingdom. For example, it was once assumed that the coniferous gymnosperm Métais sequoia, which was commonplace across the northern hemisphere from the late Cretaceous onwards, had died out by the Miocene. The genus was discovered to be alive and well in Lichuan County, Hubei Province, China. Growing in hilly and wetland ecosystems, these fast-growing deciduous trees can reach 40 to 50 metres in height, and have apparently changed very little since the late Cretaceous, with fossils being near identical to the modern species Metasequoia glyptostroboides. It was formally described in 1948, after which the dawn redwood caused a sensation in botanical circles, being hailed as a living fossil. This phenomenon also applies to totally extinct species as well, with the genus Lazarus being a shoo-in for a video on this subject matter. Belonging to the enigmatic group Chiristodera, a lineage of semi-aquatic, potentially archosaurian reptiles of controversial relationships that thrived during the Cretaceous. It had been thought that the smaller and more lizard-like members of this group had died out by the end of the early Cretaceous, leaving only the larger and superficially gharial-like forms to persist into the late Cretaceous and early Cenozoic. However, the description of Lazarus from late Paleocene age deposits in Europe that dated to circa 61 million years ago demonstrated that small Chiristoderans had survived undetected in the fossil record for tens of millions of years. The genus itself was also the youngest known Chiristoderan, potentially persisting until the late Miocene in Germany, France and the Czech Republic until roughly 11 million years ago. Additionally, the status of Lazarus taxon is also sometimes applied to animals that likely went extinct during the 20th century, but are suspected by some to be still alive, such as the Australian thylacine or the North American ivory-billed woodpecker. Factors that influence either a species or entire family becoming Lazarus taxa include some combination of scarce population numbers, remote habitats, cryptic behaviour, small body sizes, or biases in the fossil record, with the list of animals returning from the zoological grave being quite extensive, although I should probably sign off the video from here. Thanks for watching, everyone. The next episode will be covering the evolution and spread of the humble and at times reviled rodents of the clade Ratini, a few of which have greatly benefited from their association with humans. See you again soon. Cheerio.